The story of the Raidens of Hoyoverse is nothing if not that of sacrifice. One would subject herself to self-destruction to save the soul of her beloved. Another would become the very definition of nihility, trying to save her world. The other would slay her own friend to free that friend from her eternal suffering. With each sacrifice comes the grief of separation, bitterness of surviving the tragedy, and isolation from the rest of the world. When Raiden made it not pull back her punches on that rooftop, it was because she wanted Kiana to stop being selfless for once. She became the Hersher of Thunder because it meant dissolving one of the Hersher cores from Kiana, thus slowing down the Honkai corrosion in her body. She left Kiana and joined World Serpent despite its bad reputation because it meant lessening Kiana's burden of having to take care of every single Honkai outbreak. If saving Kiana was a sin, Mei would gladly become a sinner. When Raiden B. Mei, or Akron as she goes by these days, fought tirelessly against the invasion of Kami in her homeworld, it was because she believed there would be light at the end of the tunnel, learning a little too late that her world had always been doomed to fall. The sun that she was aiming for was not the sun, it was a black hole, a manifestation of nihility that would swallow the planet whole. Her resistance against the Kami was all for naught. And in that fleeting moment of despair, she stepped under the shadow of nihility, becoming an extension of the shadow herself. When Raiden A enforced the Sakoku decree on Inazuma, she did it out of fear that humans' ambition would get the worst of them, thus condemning the entire nation to destruction. She did it out of love for her people, albeit a misguided one. She had lost a sister and 2 friends and killed another. All was lost because of another nation's sin. What was an eternity of stillness and isolation if it meant her people would be safe from the heavenly principle's divine wrath? In one way or another, each of them sees themselves as a tool to meet an end. Mei so that Kiana could live longer, Akron so that her planet would survive the invasion, A so that her beloved Inazuma would not be destroyed by the heavenly principle. However, this is where A differs from the other two. Mei's separation from Kiana was a point from which she grew. It was not the end of her journey. The world would soon bear witness to her growth as a character, of her becoming the current era's Hersher of origin. Akron's becoming an accidental extension of nihility set her out on her current journey to find the eon of nihility itself. She would eventually lose everything that makes her her, all of her memories completely annihilated, but before that time comes, she vows to be the blade that would reach nihility's end and cut down that divine being herself. On the other hand, A's enactment of the Sakoku decree was not a point from which she grew. It didn't set her out on a new journey. It put her in stasis, stillness, because it was the conclusion that she arrived at after all the losses she suffered. In fact, it was something that she had to undo. When Yae Miko told Traveler that A had shed her mortal body and put her consciousness in the plane of euthymia, the first question that came to my mind was, what kind of loss had she suffered that drove her to think eternal isolation was its best remedy? For her to think that stillness would protect her people from ever experiencing the kind of loss she did, what had she lost? And it turned out to be not just one, but 4 people dear to her. One, although A might be too ashamed to admit it that the truth got lost in legend, died by her own blade. But instead of regulating her emotion and allowing herself to come to terms with the losses, she chose to not feel at all. A mechanical body immune to eventual erosion took her place to guard Inazuma while she rid herself of her physical body, leaving nothing but her consciousness put in her dead sister's sword. Perhaps she thought that the absence of a physical body, a physical heart, would spare her the pain. But even Archons are not immune to emotional strain. Mizuki, a clinical psychologist who recently returned to Inazuma, said that humans, yokai, and Archons alike bore the same capacity for emotion and were naturally susceptible to the same mental turmoil. A was no exception. A herself thought she was. Of course she did. Her origin was that of Makoto's shadow. She was the Electro Archon in battle, slaying Makoto's enemies for her. While Makoto was a gentle god who enjoyed conversations with Furuyama and drinking tea during her free time, A spent her free time in training. What Makoto lacked in physical strength, A made up for it. She was Makoto's blade. Of course she believed herself immune to emotional strain. But the truth was, not only was she not immune to mental turmoil, she was also powerless in the face of her loss. For all the martial prowess that she possessed, A couldn't bring herself to acknowledge her loss, let alone regulating her emotions and coming to terms with the death of her loved ones. Before she left for the plane of euthymia, she couldn't even bring herself to say goodbye to Yae Miko, the only familiar face left after the disaster. Because saying goodbye to her before her self-inflicted eternal isolation was just another farewell added to the pile of losses that she couldn't even begin to acknowledge. So she simply left. Her self-isolation was both her coping mechanism and her inability to fill in Makoto's role. Inazuma, that had suffered from the attack of the abyss, needed someone like Makoto to nurture the nation back to life, not someone like her who only knew how to slay the shogun's enemies in battle. This mindset, this idea that she was inferior to Makoto, carried on until after she won her 500-year-long fight against the shogun puppet. For a brief moment in Makoto's realm of consciousness, she was able to communicate with a fragment of Makoto's consciousness, something that could only happen because A finally managed to reconcile her division of eternity with Makoto's, something that Makoto wished would happen someday in the future, the key to unlocking Makoto's parting gift that would help A rebuild Inazuma from 500 years prior. This key was the seed of the sacred sakura tree. A planted the seed in the present, and with the help of Istaroth, it was carried to the beginning of time, allowing the sacred sakura to exist since time immemorial, ready to cleanse the abyssal filth in Inazuma. In the aftermath of it, A praised Makoto's brilliance in foreseeing all the ways in which Inazuma's future could unfold. It was thanks to Makoto and Makoto alone that Inazuma was not lost to the abyss. And when Traveler tried to point out that it was also thanks to her contribution, a crucial one at that, she simply said,
"I just planted a seed."
But she didn't just plant a seed. Act 2 of her story quest saw A slowly opening up about her losses, about Makoto, about Kitsune Saigu. She even admitted to being powerless in saving her loved ones. More importantly, she finally understood Makoto's perspective on eternity. As a result, the puppet that she had programmed to eliminate those who would oppose her definition of eternity turned against her. With her changed view, A herself became a threat to eternity. Then she fought the shogun for 500 years within that pocket dimension, unchanging in her resolve until eventually the shogun backed down and acknowledged that A's changed view was not a result of erosion. This unchanging resolve was what activated the last fragment of Makoto's consciousness stored within the sword, and so the seed was obtained. That was more than just planting a seed. As Traveler said, the final act might be a simple one, but getting there was the result of countless efforts coming together. A had always thought less of herself. She undermined her importance, for she had spent all of her life as Makoto's blade. Protecting those around her was simply her duty. Even when Makoto said that she felt forever indebted to A, for it was A's polearm that had always protected her, A shook her head, rejecting that gratitude. It was simply her duty. She was but a sword. Makoto owed her nothing. Even her people saw her as nothing but a sword, some of them at least. Remember Kujo Takayuki, the trader who worked together with Fatui and set the Vision Hunt decree plan in motion? He was not afraid that the Fatui would get the upper hand of the situation and eventually take over Inazuma because he said,
"None can contend with the supreme power of the almighty Raiden Shogun and the Muso no Hitotachi."
Even Paimon, who can be a bit naive as a child that she is, immediately saw Kujo Takayuki for what he was, a worshipper not of the Raiden Shogun herself, but of her power as a warrior. So, while Act 2 of A's story quest was the first step to A getting closure for her losses, the healing arc was far from over. Yae Miko had suggested this notion to A many times before. She asked how A was feeling after that final goodbye with Makoto, and A said physically she had recovered, fully regaining control of the puppet, completely missing the fact that Miko was asking how she was feeling emotionally. She encouraged A to get out of Tenshukaku more often, especially when there was an event in Inazuma. A would show up for a second, look around a little bit before returning back to Tenshukaku, believing that the longer she lingered, the more uncomfortable she would make everyone feel. She's the people's revered god after all. It's hard not to get a bit worked up when the god you worship is taking a stroll in the neighborhood. When everyone was enjoying the music festival Ito brought to Inazuma, A simply watched them from afar, the talk of war the only thing in her mind. Still, the safety of the people was her only concern. So, it was to no one's surprise that when signs of nightmare returning to Inazuma were detected during the Mikawa Flower Festival, A once again put forth the importance of protecting Inazuma at all costs. Mikoshi Chiyo was one of the friends A lost back then, her mind consumed by the abyss, her death delivered by A's own hand. This so-called nightmare originated from part of Chiyo's broken horn that A cut off of her 500 years ago. If you remember, she was one of the 4 people featured in A's character teaser that was released almost 4 years ago, not so coincidentally titled Nightmare. Legend has it, Chiyo was once swallowed by a beast from the abyss while she was fighting back the forces of the abyss, an event that took place almost 500 years ago around the same time as the destruction of Khaenri'ah. While Chiyo eventually managed to tear the creature's body apart from within and break free, she was already stained by abyssal corruption. In her eyes, she would see her family and friends ripped to shreds by those monsters, while in reality, they were actually not. It was but an illusion caused by the corruption, a walking nightmare. A similar condition that many in Natlan suffered from after the big battle against the Abyss. Traveler was trapped in it for a brief moment, seeing a harmless 3-colored dango on the ground like it was a sword. Consumed by nightmare, Chiyo would eventually draw her sword upon A. In her mind, she saw A about to be eaten by the monster. In reality, A was unharmed while she herself was about to strike the shogun head-on. She lost her sword arm and 1 horn for it, but legend is unsure about Chiyo's fate. Some say she was slain by the Tengu or the Shumetsuban. Some say it was a science of the Iwakura clan. The truth is, A unleashed the Musono Hitotachi on Chiyo, which cost not only Chiyo a horn and her sword arm, but also her life. A portion of Mount Jogo, where the incident took place, was also chopped off, burying Chiyo's broken horn and the remnants of her nightmare with it. This truth was something that only A and Miko knew, something that Miko had to draw out of A by recklessly calling Chiyo the Tiger Bite, a title earned when Chiyo ripped apart and broke free from the beast that swallowed her, a title that A believed Chiyo wouldn't like. Earlier, Miko had devised a plan with Mizuki to get A to open up, sensing that this entire nightmare crisis was somehow affecting A, which in turn annoyed A. The only reason she withheld this information from the group was that she wasn't sure if the current crisis had anything to do with the one from 500 years ago, admitting that once she was certain enough of the connection, she would have shared the intel. Miko scoffed at this. Her only concern was A's well-being, intel about the crisis be damned. Just as she once thought Miko was asking about the puppet's physical condition after her final farewell with Makoto, A once again mistook Miko's concern. Once the origin of the nightmare was confirmed, A naturally assumed the task to eliminate it. The real Mikoshi Chiyo had passed, she said. What lingered was but a mere fragment of a nightmare tied to her severed horn. She would prioritize the safety of the living over the memory of the dead. As she said this, she walked away from the group, her mind already set on the task at hand. Her personal feeling about having to once again kill her friend left behind with the group and their growing concern for the shogun. While Traveler only voiced their concern in their mind, as did Mizuki no doubt, Miko interrupted A's resolution by saying that she couldn't care less about the dead anyway and was simply looking out for the living. A statement that to someone like A might seem disrespectful since she had to separate Chiyo from the nightmare fragment in order to reaffirm her resolution. The nightmare fragment and Chiyo are not the same. She had to tell herself that. But this statement was one spoken out of love on Miko's part, as she kept her eyes on A the whole time. She was saying that she was only looking out for the living. It was A she worried about. She didn't want A to be the one shouldering the burden of killing her dead friend, no matter how little of a fragment of Chiyo was left on the horn. But of course, since it was A that she was talking to, Miko had to trick her into agreeing with her by explaining that the living she was referring to were none other than the Baketanuki that were affected by Chiyo's nightmare fragment. Since they were affected by it for the last 500 years, unleashing the Musono Hitotachi to repel the nightmare might harm the Baketanuki as well. Only then, only when her action might harm the living that she was trying to protect, did A reconsider her options, asking whether Miko had an alternative solution. Cunning as she is, Miko sure knows it best when it comes to saving A from her own self-destructive nature. Just as she once said,
"You want to save the people of Inazuma from the Vision Hunt decree. So do I. The only difference is that I'd rather like to save this nation and save A while we're at it."
In the end, A agreed to not unleash the Musono Hitotachi and invited Traveler to fight the nightmare with her, while Miko and Mizuki would be the one in charge of the ritual to subdue the nightmare fragment. All went according to plan, and Chiyo's nightmare fragment that had lingered for 500 years was finally cleansed from the land. The nightmare that had been with A for 500 years, the guilt of having to kill her own friend both for Inazuma's sake and Chiyo's sake, dissipated, replaced by relief knowing that she had truly freed Chiyo from the shackle of darkness, believing that Chiyo's nightmare had now been replaced by sweet dreams. While her loved ones left her in the nightmare teaser, this time all of them were together in the sweet dream. While A used to turn her back on her people, believing that she was all alone, only turning back to take away their visions as she thought to be the best way to protect them, refusing to admit even to Makoto that she had wanted to cry in the 500 years of isolation, this time, she allowed herself to shed a tear, and when she turned around, it was because she knew she was not alone, emerging from the darkness with the moon illuminating her smile. This piece was written because I could not stop crying after completing the Mikawa Flower Festival quest, realizing that A's pain was much bigger and much more unsolved than I originally thought. While you might dislike her for her terrible choices in the past, for how long the story took to give her any semblance of character growth, Act 2 literally being released 4 patches after the final act of Inazuma Archon quest, I think there are things that we can take away from her journey. Perhaps some of us can relate to her earlier struggle, shutting people out and suppressing emotions instead of acknowledging our griefs and coming to terms with it. Perhaps it's the hard choice of having to do something that no one else would, for not only you're the only one strong enough to do it, but also because you care too much about your loved ones that you refuse to let them continue down the wrong path. Or perhaps it's the inability to fathom that there are those around you that actually care for your well-being simply because they do care. If the only thing that differentiates humans and Archons is their noses, and what unites them is their flaws, then A is no different than any other human. Just as her fear of losing her loved ones is what makes her strong, her flaws make her human. And I couldn't be happier that she was slowly getting the closure of the losses she experienced in the past. Perhaps we will get to see the grievance between her and the people of Watatsumi Island resolve one day. After all, even some players still think that Orobashi's death was simply caused by him attacking the people of Yashari Island. Or perhaps more Kitsune Saigo lore is about time Yae Miko shows some vulnerability too, I think. And for Ioroi to know that Kitsune Saigo has passed away, that their hide-and-seek game has long ended. And with a clinical psychologist introduced to the story, I think the healing arc for every traumatized person on Tevat is just right around the corner.